The massive diplomatic chamber of the Zarn Collective's flagship, the Celestial Arbiter, hummed with an electric tension that most of the alien delegates failed to recognize. To them, this was just another routine first contact, another primitive species to be cataloged, potentially exploited, and ultimately dismissed. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood perfectly still, her dark eyes scanning the semicircular chamber lined with representatives from 12 different alien civilizations. Each delegation sat in raised, climate-controlled pods that reflected their unique physiological requirements. The Chlorvax representatives needed constant atmospheric pressure that would have crushed a human. The silicon-based Krelin delegates required temperature ranges that would melt most organic matter. And yet, here was humanity, represented by a single human delegation that seemed almost absurdly vulnerable by comparison. Primary diplomat Krasnak of the Zarn Collective rose to his full height, nearly 3 meters of muscular biomechanical engineering. His exoskeleton gleamed with integrated communication nodes and defensive augmentations that made human military technology look like children's toys. When he spoke, translation systems converted his complex language of chemical signals and vibration into crisp, almost mocking standard Galactic. Humanity, he began, his voice dripping with condescension, represents the most marginal of sentient species we have encountered in 3 galactic cycles. Your technological development is primitive. Your biological structure is fragile. Your social systems are chaotic and inefficient. Behind Rodriguez, her team remained motionless. Dr. Marcus Chen, the mission's lead technological analyst, maintained a neutral expression. Lieutenant Commander Aisha Nakamura, head of security, subtly adjusted her neural interface, a piece of technology so advanced that it would take the Zarn decades to comprehend its full capabilities. Krasnak continued his verbal assault. We have reviewed your species' historical records. Your achievements are nothing more than a series of fortunate accidents, space exploration, merely a desperate attempt to escape your own planetary limitations, technological innovations, simple problem-solving born of survival instinct. Your entire civilization is a statistical anomaly that will soon be forgotten. The other alien delegates shifted in their seats. Some leaned forward, their various sensory appendages tracking Rodriguez with a mixture of curiosity and barely concealed contempt. The Chlorvax representative, a massive creature that resembled a cross between a jellyfish and a complex computing network, pulsed with what could only be described as diplomatic amusement. Rodriguez knew exactly what was happening. This was more than a diplomatic meeting. It was a deliberate psychological attack designed to establish a clear hierarchy. The Galactic Concordance had a long history of categorizing and controlling emerging species, and humanity was about to be slotted into the lowest possible tier. She had prepared for this moment her entire career. A subtle neural command activated the holographic systems integrated into her seemingly simple diplomatic uniform. What appeared to be a standard environmental suit was actually a marvel of human technological innovation. A mobile command center that could interface with virtually any known technological system. The chamber's environmental systems began to shift. The harsh, sterile lighting that favored the alien physiology softened. A series of holographic displays materialized, not as static images, but as dynamic, living representations of human history. But these were no ordinary historical records. Each projection was carefully curated to demonstrate not just human achievement, but human potential. Scenes of scientific breakthrough merged with moments of incredible resilience. A surgeon performing a complex medical procedure in zero-gravity transitioned to engineers constructing massive infrastructure projects under impossible conditions. Archaeological discoveries blended with quantum computing breakthroughs. The images moved with a fluidity that was almost alive, each transition telling a story of adaptation, innovation, and relentless determination. Krasnak's mocking speech faltered. The other delegates leaned forward, their various sensory mechanisms struggling to process the rapidly changing displays. This was humanity's first statement to the galaxy, and it was anything but a plea for recognition. It was a challenge. The technological demonstration hall was a marvel of human engineering, a space that could reconfigure itself faster than most alien species could comprehend thought. Dr. Marcus Chen stood at its center, surrounded by what appeared to be a chaotic array of holographic interfaces, quantum computing nodes, and biological integration systems that seemed to pulse with an almost sentient energy. "We will now demonstrate a comprehensive problem-solving challenge," Chen announced, his voice calm and devoid of the typical academic pomposity. "The task is simple, or at least it has been simple for the past 3 centuries of galactic scientific research." A massive holographic projection materialized, displaying the concordance computational paradox, a mathematical and computational challenge that had stumped the galaxy's most advanced civilizations for generations. It was a multi-dimensional problem that required simultaneous solution across quantum, biological, and computational domains, a test that no single species had ever come close to solving. The alien observers leaned forward. The Zarn delegation's lead scientist, Dr. Vexnera, couldn't help but smirk. "This is the challenge that has defeated the combined computational power of the galactic concordance for 300 years, he said loudly, meant to be heard by all. "We look forward to watching your attempt." What happened next was nothing short of scientific warfare. Instead of a single approach, Chen activated a network of human researchers, each working simultaneously, but in completely different methodological frameworks. A young intern named Sofia Rodriguez, no relation to the diplomatic captain, began attacking the problem using a biological computing interface that seemed to blur the lines between organic thought and computational processing. Beside her, a team of quantum physicists manipulated holographic representations that twisted and transformed with impossible complexity. Their interfaces weren't just displaying data, they were actively engaging with the problem, learning and adapting in real time. Another researcher, Dr. Camille Edenuga, approached the challenge from a completely unexpected angle. His system began breaking down the computational paradox using principles of artistic interpretation and fractal mathematics, an approach so unconventional that the alien observers began to look uncomfortable. The Zarn delegation watched in growing disbelief. Their own computational systems worked through linear, predictable methodologies. Humanity seemed to be treating the most complex mathematical challenge in galactic history like an improvisational jazz performance. Sophia's biological interface began to do something truly unprecedented. The computational node seemed to breathe, to pulse with an organic rhythm that defied traditional understanding of machine learning. She wasn't just solving the problem. She was communicating with it, her neural patterns dancing across quantum states in a way that made traditional computing look like an abacus. 37 minutes into the demonstration, something extraordinary happened. Not one, but 3 completely different solutions emerged simultaneously. Each was valid. Each was brilliant. But more importantly, each solution revealed something fundamentally different about the nature of the computational challenge itself. Dr. Vexnera's smirk had long since vanished. The Zarn delegation's computational experts were running increasingly frantic verification protocols, their complex biomechanical interfaces working overtime to validate what they were witnessing. "Impossible," Vexnera muttered, his universal translator capturing the raw disbelief in his voice. Chen stepped forward, a holographic representation of the solutions spinning behind him. "Impossible is just a word used by people who haven't yet understood the full potential of adaptive thinking," he said quietly. The most shocking moment came from the youngest member of the team. The 22-year-old intern, Sofia Rodriguez, looked up from her interface and smiled. "Oh," she said casually, "I think I see how we could solve this in 3 more dimensions." The alien observers went absolutely silent. This was more than a technological demonstration. This was a fundamental challenge to everything the Galactic Concordance understood about problem-solving, intelligence, and potential. Humanity wasn't just presenting a solution. They were rewriting the entire concept of what solution meant. The planet designated XR 772 was a nightmare of environmental hostility. Gravity so intense it could crush most known species, an atmosphere composed of corrosive gases that would dissolve organic matter within seconds, radiation levels that exceeded the most extreme tolerances of any documented life form in the Galactic Concordance. The Zarn Collective had designed this world specifically to break humanity. They called it the Survival Crucible, a planetary testing ground that had been the final resting place for dozens of species deemed too weak for galactic exploration. Each environment was carefully calibrated to push biological systems to their absolute limits and beyond. Dr. Aisha Nakamura checked her team's environmental suits, which were anything but traditional protective gear. Each suit was a living, adaptive biological system that was as much an organism as the humans wearing it. Micromechanical neural networks interwoven with genetically modified cellular structures created a symbiotic protection mechanism that defied every known principle of survival. Insertion point in 30 seconds, Lieutenant Carlos Martinez announced, his voice steady despite the impossible conditions awaiting them. The 5-person team represented the pinnacle of human biological engineering. Each member selected not just for their skills, but for their body's potential for adaptive mutation. The drop shuttle's hull began to heat, then glow, then practically melt as it penetrated the planet's toxic atmosphere. Traditional shielding would have failed instantly. The human adaptive systems simply absorbed the energy, redistributed it, and continued the descent as if flying through a mild breeze. Chief Science Officer Dr. Elena Volkov monitored the real-time biological data streaming from each team member's neural interface. What she saw was nothing short of miraculous. Their bodies weren't just surviving. They were actively rewriting their own genetic code in real time. Carlos's muscular structure began to compress, becoming denser to withstand the crushing gravity. His bone density increased by 400% in milliseconds. Microhydraulic systems integrated with his muscle fibers allowed for movement that would have been impossible under normal conditions. Aisha's respiratory system transformed, developing entirely new gas exchange mechanisms that could process the toxic atmosphere. Specialized cellular structures began breaking down the corrosive gases, converting them into harmless compounds that her body could use as energy sources. The radiation that should have been instantly lethal instead became something else entirely. The team's genetically modified cellular structures not only protected against radiation, but began to convert its energy into usable biological power. Specialized mitochondrial descendants absorbed and transformed the deadly environmental factors. Insertion complete, Carlos reported. Preliminary environmental scan commencing. The alien observers watched in absolute horror. The Zarn Collective had designed XR-772 to be the ultimate biological challenge. Planets like these were typically used to demonstrate the futility of species they deemed unworthy of galactic membership. Entire civilizations had been essentially executed by this single planetary environment. But the human team treated it like a routine field expedition. "Anyone want coffee?" Aisha called out casually, her voice completely calm despite being surrounded by an environment that would have liquefied any other known life form within milliseconds. Carlos chuckled. "Black, if possible. Radiation levels are looking particularly robust today." Dr. Volkov, monitoring from the orbital platform, could barely contain her scientific excitement. Each moment provided unprecedented data about human biological potential. The adaptive mechanisms weren't just protecting the team. They were learning, evolving, expanding their capabilities with each passing second. The most shocking moment came 2 hours into the expedition. Not only had the team survived, but they were now collecting samples, running complex scientific experiments, and mapping the planetary environment with a level of detail that would take traditional exploratory teams months to achieve. A junior Zarn scientist turned to his senior colleague, his translator capturing the pure terror in his voice. They're not just surviving. They're thriving." The senior diplomat could only watch in stunned silence. Humanity had just rewritten the fundamental understanding of biological adaptation. This was more than a survival test. This was a declaration of biological potential that would forever change how the galaxy understood life itself. The Grand Concordance diplomatic nexus was a marvel of interstellar architecture, a massive, floating structure that had been the center of galactic diplomacy for over 7 centuries. Its crystalline chambers were designed to intimidate, to demonstrate the accumulated power of multiple advanced civilizations. Captain Elena Rodriguez understood intimidation. She was about to demonstrate something far more powerful. The primary negotiation chamber fell silent as she activated her presentation. Instead of the traditional holographic displays, the room itself began to transform. Historical records of the Galactic Concordance's most significant diplomatic moments materialized around the delegates, but with a critical difference. Each projection was annotated with a complex network of connections, revealing systemic flaws that no one had ever dared to expose so publicly. "Let's discuss governance," Rodriguez began, her voice calm and precise. The Zarn delegation's lead diplomat, Krasnak, shifted uncomfortably. The human captain was doing something unprecedented. She wasn't arguing. She was deconstructing. Holographic threads began to weave between historical moments, revealing a pattern of manipulative policies that had maintained the Concordance's power for centuries. Trade agreements that had systematically marginalized emerging species. Technological embargoes designed to keep potential competitors from advancing. Diplomatic protocols that ensured a permanent hierarchy. "Your system isn't a cooperative alliance," Rodriguez continued, her fingers dancing across a neural interface that projected increasingly complex analytical models. "It's a sophisticated mechanism of control." The most shocking moments came when she began to demonstrate how these policies had directly impacted specific civilizations. For each species the Concordance had marginalized, Rodriguez presented alternative developmental paths, detailed simulations showing how they could have evolved without systematic suppression. A holographic representation of the Chlorvax civilization appeared, a species that had been technologically stifled for generations. Rodriguez's simulation showed their potential trajectory if they had been given genuine technological and diplomatic support. The difference was staggering. "We're not here to destroy your system," she said, her voice cutting through the chamber's stunned silence. "We're here to evolve it." The diplomatic strategy was multilayered. Each revelation was carefully crafted not just to expose flaws, but to offer constructive alternatives. Rodriguez wasn't just criticizing. She was presenting a comprehensive roadmap for interstellar cooperation that was simultaneously threatening and deeply attractive. Dr. Marcus Chen, seated behind her, monitored the diplomatic interfaces. Each of Rodriguez's statements was supported by real-time data analysis, complex predictive models that showed potential outcomes with unprecedented clarity. The human delegation had essentially turned diplomatic negotiation into a form of advanced systems engineering. The most senior Chlorvax representative, a being that typically remained entirely neutral, leaned forward. The diplomatic translation systems captured a subtle vibration that roughly translated to profound interest. Krasnak attempted to interrupt. "You cannot possibly understand the complexities of Galactic." Rodriguez cut him off with a surgical precision that left the chamber breathless. A series of holographic windows opened, revealing classified Concordance diplomatic records that predated the Zarn Collective's involvement in interstellar governance. "Let me show you what you've forgotten," she said. The records revealed a previous iteration of the Concordance, one that had been far more collaborative, far more open to emerging species. Somewhere in the past 7 centuries, the Alliance had transformed from a cooperative network to a control mechanism. Humanity wasn't just challenging the current system. They were offering a path back to a more fundamental vision of interstellar cooperation. The Chamber's environmental systems seemed to hold their breath. Diplomatic representatives from a dozen different species found themselves reevaluating everything they understood about political negotiation. Captain Rodriguez smiled. This was diplomacy as a form of collective imagination, a tool for reimagining potential futures rather than protecting existing power structures. The Galactic Concordance would never be the same again. The Galactic Warfare Simulation Chamber was the most advanced strategic testing ground in known space, a massive holographic environment that could recreate any conceivable military scenario with quantum-level precision. For centuries, it had been used to evaluate the combat potential of emerging species, a final test before determining their galactic classification. General Marcus Hawkins stepped into the chamber with 5 members of his most elite tactical team. They looked almost casual, which immediately set the alien observers on edge. Scenario parameters, announced the Zarn Collective's chief tactical analyst. Standard Containment Protocol Omega. Objective: neutralize a technologically superior force protecting a critical strategic resource. A holographic environment materialized. A complex planetary system with multiple defensive layers. The alien simulation designers had constructed a nearly impossible scenario. A heavily fortified planet protected by a multi-layered defense network that included quantum lock shield systems, autonomous weapon platforms, and a defensive grid that could predict and neutralize incoming attacks with near-perfect accuracy. Traditional military doctrine would suggest multiple approach vectors, sustained bombardment, or a prolonged siege. Humanity had other ideas. The first indication that something was different came within moments of the simulation beginning. While the alien observers expected to see tactical formations or weapon deployments, the human team seemed to be doing something else entirely. Lieutenant Aria Chen, the team's communication specialist, was interfacing with the simulation's communication networks in a way that defied conventional understanding. She wasn't just intercepting signals. She was engaging with the defensive systems as if they were a complex, living organism. "They're talking to the defensive grid," a junior Zarn analyst muttered in disbelief. "How are they talking to the defensive grid?" Hawkins' tactical approach was less about destruction and more about transformation. The human team began introducing complex information patterns into the planetary defense systems. Not attacks, but adaptive cognitive challenges that caused the autonomous defensive mechanisms to question their own operational parameters. A quantum lock shield that should have been impenetrable began to show micro-fluctuations, not because of any direct attack, but because the humans were fundamentally challenging its foundational decision-making algorithms. Lieutenant Carlos Martinez focused on the planetary infrastructure. Instead of targeting physical systems, he was systematically introducing adaptive cognitive viruses that didn't destroy. They evolved. Each defensive countermeasure the planet's systems developed was immediately analyzed, understood, and incorporated into a new approach. The most shocking moment came 27 minutes into the simulation. The entire planetary defense network didn't collapse. It transformed. Where there had been a complex defensive grid, now existed something else entirely. The autonomous systems were actively communicating with the human tactical team, their defensive protocols rewriting themselves in real time. "Objective completed," General Hawkins said quietly, almost as an afterthought. The Zarn Collective's tactical experts were running increasingly frantic verification protocols. This wasn't just a military victory. This was a fundamental reimagining of warfare itself. Dr. Elena Volkov, observing from the simulation's analysis platform, was capturing every moment of data. The humans weren't just defeating a defensive system. They were engaging in a form of technological diplomacy that blurred the lines between conflict and communication. "We're not here to destroy," Hawkins explained to the stunned observers. "We're here to understand, to adapt, to find potential." The simulation's final moments were the most terrifying for the alien observers. The planetary defense network, which should have been a weapon of absolute control, had become something else. A collaborative system that was more interested in solving complex problems than maintaining rigid defensive protocols. A senior Zarn tactical analyst turned to his colleague, his translation systems capturing pure disbelief. They didn't just win. They negotiated with a planetary defense grid. Humanity had just demonstrated that warfare could be a form of advanced problem-solving, not destruction, not conquest. Communication. The Galactic Concordance would never view military potential the same way again. The Cultural Exchange Symposium was supposed to be a routine diplomatic formality. The Galactic Concordance had conducted thousands of such events, carefully managed presentations designed to categorize and contain emerging species. They were about to witness something entirely unprecedented. Dr. Yara Rodriguez took the central stage, not as a diplomat, not as a scientist, but as a storyteller. Behind her, a holographic interface began to pulse with something more alive than any technological display the alien delegates had ever seen. "Culture is not about display," she began, her voice carrying a resonance that seemed to fill the entire chamber. "It's about transformation." The first presentation defied every expectation. Instead of a clinical overview of human artistic achievements, Rodriguez began to weave a narrative that was simultaneously a historical account, a philosophical exploration, and a living, breathing emotional landscape. Music emerged, not as a simple sound, but as a complex neural interface that seemed to translate emotional experiences across species boundaries. A composition began that was part mathematical theorem, part emotional journey. The alien delegates found themselves experiencing memories that were not their own, complex emotional landscapes that transcended linguistic and biological limitations. A Chlorvax representative, a being composed of intricate biomechanical networks, began to vibrate in a way that their translation systems could only describe as profound emotional resonance. Dr. Marcus Chen, seated in the observation area, was monitoring the cultural interface with scientific precision. What was happening was more than an artistic presentation. It was a form of cross-species communication that challenged everything the Concordance understood about cultural exchange. The narrative shifted. A visual representation emerged that was part historical document, part living memory. Scenes of human struggle, innovation, failure, and resilience began to interweave. But these weren't simple historical recordings. Each moment was a complex neural network of emotional and intellectual connections. A young poet, Sophia Nakamura, stepped forward. Her performance was nothing like the structured, controlled presentations the alien delegates expected. She began to speak, but it was more than speech. It was a living linguistic algorithm that seemed to reshape itself with each word. Her poem was simultaneously a mathematical exploration, an emotional journey, and a philosophical challenge. The translation systems struggled to capture its complexity. Words transformed, meaning shifted, and the very concept of communication seemed to expand. The most shocking moment came when the alien delegates realized they were no longer passive observers. The cultural interface was engaging them, challenging their fundamental understanding of perception, emotion, and intellectual potential. "We are not defined by our achievements," Sophia's performance continued. "We are defined by our capacity to reimagine ourselves." Each alien delegation experienced the presentation differently. The silicon-based Krillin found themselves processing mathematical patterns within the emotional narrative. The energy-based Luminary delegates discovered complex quantum interactions woven through the linguistic structures. Dr. Yara Rodriguez had transformed a cultural presentation into a living, adaptive communication system. The Zarn Collective's cultural attaché, a being who had observed thousands of species, found himself experiencing something unprecedented. Humans weren't presenting their culture. They were inviting other species to participate in a continuous process of cultural evolution. "We do not seek to replace," Rodriguez explained, her words becoming a complex neural pattern that danced between linguistic, mathematical, and emotional domains. "We seek to expand the very concept of potential." The symposium wasn't a presentation. It was an invitation to a different way of understanding existence itself. As the presentation concluded, the chamber fell into a stunned silence. The alien delegates weren't just observing human culture. They had been fundamentally transformed by the experience. The Galactic Concordance had expected a simple cultural overview. They had received an intellectual and emotional revolution. The Galactic Containment Initiative was the Concordance's most sophisticated attempt to limit humanity's expansion. a complex network of diplomatic restrictions, technological embargoes, and strategic blockades designed to prevent what the alien leadership saw as a potentially catastrophic species from gaining further influence. They had no idea what was coming. Captain Elena Rodriguez convened a meeting that was anything but a traditional strategic planning session. The room was filled with humanity's most brilliant minds, not just military strategists and diplomats, but artists, philosophers, engineers, and social scientists. Each brought a unique perspective to a challenge that would reshape galactic politics. Dr. Marcus Chen projected a holographic representation of the containment initiative, a complex web of interdependent systems that looked like an impenetrable fortress of bureaucratic and technological limitations. Most species would see an insurmountable barrier. The humans saw an opportunity. "We're not going to fight the system," Rodriguez explained, her voice calm and precise. "We're going to transform it." The plan was breathtakingly complex. Instead of direct confrontation, humanity would systematically identify and support marginalized species within the galactic concordance. Each alliance would be more than a simple diplomatic connection. It would be a comprehensive system of technological, cultural, and economic exchange. Lieutenant Area Chen began demonstrating the first phase. Specialized communication networks began to activate, not through traditional diplomatic channels, but through a web of adaptive technologies that could bypass existing restrictions. The Chlorvex civilization was their first target. A species that had been technologically suppressed for generations, they had been reduced to a marginalized service-level role within the concordance. Humanity's approach was nothing short of a comprehensive liberation strategy. Technological packages began to appear, not as direct technological transfers that would trigger containment protocols, but as adaptive learning systems. Each package was a complex neural network that could help the Chlorvax develop their own technological capabilities, working around the Concordance's strict development restrictions. The most shocking element was the speed and adaptability of the approach. As soon as the Concordance identified and attempted to block one avenue of support, humanity would develop three more. It was technological and diplomatic guerrilla warfare, a constant, fluid adaptation that made traditional containment impossible. Dr. Elena Volka focused on the economic aspects. Specialized trade networks began to emerge, creating economic pathways that existed in the quantum spaces between existing regulations. Each transaction was a complex dance of adaptive algorithms that made traditional monitoring systems obsolete. "We're not breaking their rules," Volkov explained to the team. "We're revealing how fundamentally broken those rules are." The Zarn Collective's monitoring systems began to show increasing signs of confusion. Containment protocols that had worked for centuries were becoming increasingly ineffective. It wasn't that humanity was defeating the system. They were rendering it irrelevant. More critically, humanity wasn't just supporting the Chlorvax. They were helping them develop their own adaptive capabilities. Educational systems, technological interfaces, cultural exchange programs. Each was designed to help the Chlorvax develop their own potential rather than simply receiving assistance. By the time the Concordance realized what was happening, it was too late. Dozens of marginalized species began to find new pathways of development. Technological innovations emerged from unexpected places. Economic networks formed that existed beyond traditional power structures. The containment was transforming into an unexpected renaissance. A senior Zarn administrative official reviewed the emerging data with growing terror. This wasn't just resistance. This was a fundamental reimagining of interstellar cooperation. "They're not fighting the system," the official muttered, almost to themselves. "They're creating an entirely new one." Humanity had just demonstrated that the most powerful form of resistance isn't destruction. It's continuous, adaptive creation. The Galactic Concordance would never be the same again. The Grand Concordance Assembly had never experienced a moment like this in 7 centuries of existence. What began as an attempt to marginalize humanity had become something entirely different, a fundamental restructuring of galactic civilization. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood at the center of the massive diplomatic chamber, but she was no longer alone. Surrounding her were representatives from species that had, until recently, been considered too insignificant to have a voice. The Chlorvax, once relegated to service roles, now stood with their heads held high. The energy-based luminary, previously confined to specific diplomatic niches, radiated a newfound confidence. "We are not here to replace," Rodriguez began, her voice carrying a resonance that seemed to fill the entire chamber. "We are here to evolve." The holographic displays behind her told a story of transformation. Economic networks that had once been rigid and hierarchical now pulsed with adaptive complexity. Technological development curves showed exponential growth for species that had been systematically suppressed for generations. Cultural exchanges had become living, breathing systems of mutual understanding. Dr. Marcus Chen stepped forward, presenting a comprehensive analysis that was part scientific report, part philosophical manifesto. The data told a story of unprecedented collaborative potential. Species that had been isolated were now creating breakthrough innovations through cross-cultural exchange. Technological solutions emerged from unexpected combinations. A Chlorvax communication algorithm merged with a human adaptive learning system, a luminary energy management technique, combined with a silicon-based Krillin computational approach. The most shocking revelations came from the economic data. The new cooperative networks had generated more value in 5 years than the previous concordance system had in 5 centuries. But it wasn't just about economic growth, it was about potential. Lieutenant Area Chen presented the communication network analysis. What had once been a top-down information control system was now a living, adaptive network. Information flowed not through controlled channels, but through a complex, self-organizing system that prioritized innovation and mutual understanding. A senior Zarn diplomat, who had once been the most vocal critic of humanity, now looked almost overwhelmed. The transformation was complete, but not in the way anyone had expected. Humanity hadn't conquered the galaxy. They had invited the galaxy to reimagine itself. Dr. Elena Volkov's final presentation was perhaps the most profound. It wasn't just a technological or economic analysis. It was a comprehensive model of cooperative potential, a way of understanding existence that transcended traditional boundaries of species, technology, and culture. Potential is not a fixed state, Volkov explained. It's a continuous process of becoming. The holographic displays began to shift, showing potential futures, not predetermined paths, but dynamic, adaptive possibilities. Each projection was a living demonstration of collaborative potential, species working together in ways that defied previous understanding of cooperation. Rodriguez stepped forward for the final statement. "We are not here to lead," she said. "We are here to learn, to grow, to expand the very concept of what's possible." The chamber fell into a profound silence. The Galactic Concordance had entered this moment expecting to contain humanity. They were leaving with an entirely new understanding of existence itself. As the session concluded, something remarkable happened. The rigid protocols that had defined galactic interactions for centuries began to dissolve. Species that had been separated by bureaucratic barriers began to engage in direct, meaningful dialogue. A Chlorvax representative turned to a luminary delegate. A silicon-based Krillin scientist shared a breakthrough with an energy network specialist from another system. The barriers were coming down. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had simply shown everyone how to truly explore it. In the observation chamber, a young human analyst turned to her colleague with a smile. "We're just getting started," she said. The galaxy listened.